Hello and welcome to Byju's Exam Prep IAS. Before we start with our today's analysis, a quick gentle reminder. Byju's Exam Prep IAS has already launched its official Telegram channel. What is that you have to do? Follow the link given in the description box or scan this QR code. This will take you to our official Telegram channel. Join the channel and you will get all the current affairs related updates. Let's get started and look into the first article. The first article says the concerns around Aadhaar-Voter ID linkage. Let us try and understand what is this article all about. What is the context? There was a recent instance where a block level officer had asked individuals to make sure that their voter ID is linked to the Aadhaar. He also said that if this linkage does not happen, their names would be deleted from the electoral roll and ultimately they would not be able to vote in the elections. The minute the Government of India got to know about it, the Government of India issued a clarification. The Government of India issued a clarification saying that such linkage of the voter ID with Aadhaar is not compulsory, but this happens to be a voluntary initiative. In this particular backdrop as well, we also have the Election Commission of India, which did also conduct a campaign as well on a voluntary basis. There were individuals who also linked their Election Commission voter ID card with that of the Aadhaar. So the question is, why did the Government of India come up with such a proposal? Why is the Government of India asking people to make sure that their voter ID is linked with the Aadhaar? We will look at advantages, we will also look at disadvantages, and we will also look at way forward with respect to this particular issue. What did the Government of India do in order to make sure that this linkage is possible? So in order to make sure that this linkage is possible, the Government of India introduced certain changes in the law as well as the rules. In the year 2021, Parliament passed the Election Laws Amendment Act of 2021 to amend the Representation of the People's Act of 1950. Section 23 of 4 was inserted in the Representation of the People's Act of 1950. It states that electoral registration officer may, for the purpose of establishing the identity of any person or for the purpose of authentication of entries in electoral roll for more than one constituency or more than once in the same constituency, for citizens already enrolled, require them to furnish their Aadhaar number. So the point that you have to notice, it says it may. May means it is not compulsory. It is happening on a voluntary basis. Had it been shall, then it would have been a compulsory exercise. So the Government of India has clarified that in case people want to do it, they may do it, that they can link their voter ID with that of the Aadhaar card. So it is not a compulsion, but this happens to be voluntary. Since it is voluntary, even if they do not do it, their names will not be stripped of the electoral roll and they would continue to be able to vote in the general elections, says the Government of India. To reflect this amendment, in June 2022, the government also notified changes to the registration of electoral rules of 1960. Rule 26B was added to provide that every person whose name is listed in the roll may intimate his Aadhaar number to the registration office. Now let's understand, why did the government come up with this particular proposal? Why is the Election Commission also supporting this particular proposal? First, let us look at the advantages of this particular proposal. So what are the advantages? When you look into the first advantage, it prevents voter fraud since Aadhaar information is authenticated using biometrics which cannot be replicated, and in turn the duplication of voter ID cards is also prevented. What exactly happens? There are a number of people. Let's say there is a person A. This person has the election card in constituency X. He also has an election card in the constituency Y. So he goes to this constituency X, votes for a particular person. He goes to this constituency Y, votes for a particular person. So what is happening? He is voting twice. This means there is duplication that is happening, and indirectly, illegally, he is voting for two people in two different constituencies. So as we know, we have one election, one vote, where this particular person is going to two constituencies. He also has a vote in one state and also in another state as well, which is once again illegal. To prevent all this, and in order to prevent such frauds being committed by the people. If this voter ID is linked with the Aadhaar, they would not be able to duplicate it, and ultimately the exercise of democracy happens in a rightful manner. This happens to be the first advantage. Second, currently the easiest way to freshly apply to register as a voter is to fill out a Form 6 on the NVCP, which happens to be the National Voter Service Portal or the ECI app. This can also be done on the offline pattern as well. So what happens in this particular case? Whenever you have to get your name registered on the electoral roll, your name has to be reflecting on the electoral roll. Many people say that it's a cumbersome process. So when you link the voter ID to the Aadhaar card, in that case, it becomes easy to get reflected on the electoral roll is the second advantage, which is why we have to link the voter ID with the Aadhaar. The third advantage happens to be there are people who have voted at a particular booth previously but have been inexplicably omitted from the voters list. What exactly happens? Let's say, for example, you have voted in general elections, in the assembly elections, as well as in the parliamentary elections. So there would be a particular booth that you would go and vote your candidate for. But what happens, there have been number of examples where these people who usually go to that particular booth because that is what is fixed in their constituency, but then they go to that particular booth but their names are not there on the electoral list. In all these cases, if it is linked to the Aadhaar, what would happen? You give your consent, and Aadhaar also has your contact details as well. So if there is any deletion from this electoral roll, you will automatically be intimated as well, and there you go to this particular office and also get it registered and put it on the electoral roll. In case there is any deletion, there is automatic intimation that you get because the contact details you have given consent to the Election Commission of India, so they will immediately intimate you and you would be able to get your name on the electoral roll so that you don't miss out on your franchise. And finally, several people have been turned away due to discrepancies between their details as listed on the rolls and the ID documents they present for the validation. As we initially discussed, whenever there are different documents, there are few documents which you give priority to. There are few documents which you may not give priority to. Let's say, for example, there is driving license, but many people may not drive as well, so they may not have the driving license. And at the same time, there might also be PAN card as well. This is important for few people who are doing a lot of transactions, but many people may also not have PAN card as well. But when it comes to Aadhaar, most of the people will have Aadhaar, and they will also make sure that it gets updated every now and then, because Aadhaar happens to be one important document, which is why linking Aadhaar is important with the voter ID, because it has all these advantages. So basically, first, at the end of 2021, 99.7% of the adult Indian population had an Aadhaar card. This coverage exceeds that of any other officially valid documents such as driver's license, ration cards, PAN cards, etc. They are mostly applied for the specific purposes. Second, since Aadhaar allows for biometric authentication, Aadhaar-based authentication and verification is considered more reliable, quicker, cost efficient when compared to other IDs. We can make use of other IDs, but then when we are making use of integration or linkage of the voter ID with that of the Aadhaar, it will give us much better backing. So these are the advantages and these are the reasons as to why we have to link with the Aadhaar. But then it is not always merry. There are some concerns that have been voiced by the opposition political parties and also by people who are supporters of privacy. This is where we have to go back to the Puttaswamy judgment. What does the Puttaswamy judgment say? It needs to be considered whether such mandatory linkage of Aadhaar with voter ID would pass the test of being necessary and proportionate to the purpose of deduplication which is sought to be achieved. What do we understand by this? In the Puttaswamy judgment, the Supreme Court of India gave what is called as the proportionality test with respect to the privacy. In this particular case, when you are linking your voter ID with Aadhaar, what is happening? There is violation of the privacy. In case there is violation of the privacy, what that particular instance has to pass through is called as the proportionality proportionality principle which is given by the Supreme Court of India. What is this proportionality principle? Let me explain this with the help of an example. Whenever there is violation of the privacy, what you need to do as the government end is that they have to come up with a law. Because it is breaching the privacy, the government has to come up with a law. Do we have a law in the present situation? Yes, we do have the law. The government did come up with the law, and it also made changes in the rule book as well. So do we have a law? Yes, we do have a law. Then the second thing is they need to have an objective. What is the objective in the present situation? The objective is to prevent duplication. The objective is to eliminate all these ghost accounts when it comes to the voter ID. So this is also being met in case there is linkage of the voter ID with that of the Aadhaar. Yes, we would be able to do so. The third, when it comes to the proportionality test, is do we have an alternative? So if we already have an alternative, why come up with a new one is the question that is being asked by most of the people. While we already have an advantage in the form of voter ID, why integrate it? In fact, we also have the Election Commission of India, which has not given enough amount of data as to how Aadhaar will help us, and at the same time we have ample number of examples which we'll be discussing in the next few seconds, that whenever there is linkage of Aadhaar ID as well as voter ID, in that case many people have also disenfranchised themselves. They've also been stripped of their electing rights as well. So when we already have voter ID, why not integrate technology to the existing one? Why come up with linkage of Aadhaar with the voter ID since it is failing on this front? Since Election Commission of India has not proved how it is going to be helpful, why not in the existing voter ID introduce the technology is one part of the argument. Here the Puttaswamy judgment speaks about privacy. Whenever there is breach of privacy, what you have to look at is the proportionality test. The proportionality test says that you require a law. Yes, we have a law. You will require an objective. Yes, there is an objective. But do we have an alternative? If there is an alternative, why come up with a new one? So in this particular case, we did not look at an alternative. So this means it is also violating the Puttaswamy judgment. So linkage of voter ID with Aadhaar should not be happening is the first set of argument. When you look into another judgment, the Supreme Court has also held the right to vote cannot be disallowed by insisting only on 4 proofs of identity. Voters can rely on any other proof of identity and obtain the right to vote, says Lal Bahu Hussain judgment of the Supreme Court of India. Now let's look at other arguments as well. There are a number of politicians in Parliament and also in Assembly who have said that in case the voter ID is linked with Aadhaar, in that case they would be able to prevent Nepalis and Bangladeshis will not be able to vote. But Aadhaar is not proof of citizenship. That is what is clearly depicted in the Aadhaar Act as well. So it will only help in tackling the duplication but will not remove voters who are not citizens of India. Let's look into another argument. There have been number of errors that have been reflected in the past when it comes to Aadhaar. There was an exercise undertaken in 2015 in Andhra and Telangana which led to disenfranchisement of around 30 lakh voters before the Supreme Court to stall the process of linkages. So we have ample amount of examples when this voter ID was linked with the Aadhaar, number of people were disenfranchised. They were not allowed to vote and they had to lose out on their election voting as well. Studies by multilateral organizations such as World Bank has also shown that having a single form of identification actually disenfranchises citizens and removes them from the welfare and the electoral system. We also know for the fact that when it comes to India, we have articles 325 and 326 of the Constitution which promise universal adult suffrage as well, and at the same time it says that no person will be disqualified unless it is set by the Election Commission, and they cannot be excluded on the grounds of religion, race, caste, sex or other protected categories. In case if the Aadhaar error continues, this is a constitutional right. The constitutional right is getting violated. There have been ample amount of examples as well where people who go to the ration shops where they want to get some food subsidies, they give their thumb impression and the Aadhaar is not able to authenticate them. They are not able to get the rations. They are not able to get the subsidy. Similarly, if the voter ID is linked with Aadhaar, then it may not authenticate as well. This ultimately means they are disenfranchised and they will not be allowed to vote in the general elections, and ultimately democracy's exercise will not happen on a fruitful manner. We also know for the fact that democracy is part of the basic structure. If these people do not vote, democracy's rights are getting violated. Ultimately, the very idea of basic structure is also getting violated. Justice B.N. Srikrishna, chairman of the committee that drafted the Personal Data Protection Bill, had earlier called the ECI's proposal to link the two databases most dangerous, and that is because he says this may give rise to profiling of the human beings as well. And added to it, there is data protection law which is missing. We do not have a data protection law. What if the information gets leaked? Who is to be held liable? All these are the concerns that are associated with this particular issue. So these set of arguments clearly go on to say that this linkage of voter ID with Aadhaar should not be happening, because the major idea of data protection laws, privacies and many other issues still continue to happen. It is this that we have to understand with respect to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article says the cyber threat to mobile banking. Let us try and understand what is this article all about. If we look into the statistics, according to 2020 Statista survey of 5,000 odd households across 25 states in India, two-thirds respondents said they had a smartphone. Of these, half said they sent and received money digitally, and about 31% said they had a mobile app for banking. Nearly 14% said they use mobile phones for banking related purposes as well. This clearly points out that in case you have to send or receive money, they are making use of the mobile applications. This number immediately spiked up, especially during the COVID-19 as well, and lot of people stopped using cash and they started switching to the digital modes of payment instead of transacting with cash. Why do they prefer mobile banking? That is because it is convenient, it is quick as well. They do not have to go to that particular place to hand over the cash, and at the same time, when diseases like COVID-19 are spreading, where it happens with the touch of note as well, in that case, in order to avoid all this, it is better that we use mobile applications for transaction. But there are concerns as well. What are these concerns? Whenever there is increased use of the mobile applications for the transaction, this has also resulted in increased cyber attacks on all these mobile applications. If we have to look into the statistics, global cybersecurity firm Kaspersky warns of an increase in cyber attacks on Android and iOS devices in Asia Pacific region as more people switch to mobile banking in the region. According to Kaspersky senior malware researchers, mobile banking trojans are dangerous malware that can steal money from mobile users' bank accounts by disguising the malicious application as a legitimate app to lure unsuspecting people into installing the malware. What is this trojan? Let me explain this with the help of an example. Let's say you have ICICI mobile application, or let's say for example you have HDFC mobile application. These are all to do with the banking channels. So there is another application which looks very similar to this. So you assume that it is a legitimate application, but it is not. So you download another application which is not the authenticate right application. This happens to be a Trojan which looks entirely similar to the original application. So the minute you download it, you give out your credentials, and at the same time, the person, the hacker who's given you this particular malware is able to take all your credentials, and ultimately he makes use of it to take away the money. So basically a Trojan is nothing but which looks similar to the original app, but it is not, and as a result when you download it, you give your credentials, and this credentials is stolen by this person, and ultimately he makes use of the credentials. There are examples given under this article. One such happens to be a malware called as Anubis. So remember, this happens to be a malware which can be important from the preliminary examination point of view. One mobile banking Trojan called Anubis has been targeting Android users since 2017, and its worldwide campaigns have hit users in in Russia, Turkey, India, China, Colombia, France, Germany, US, Denmark, and Vietnam. The malware has continued to be one of the most common mobile application trojans, with 110 unique Kaspersky user encountering a banking threat from the malware. How does this work? Basically, the perpetrators infect the device through legitimately looking high-ranking malicious apps on the Google Play, and they also make use of what is called as the smishing. So what is this smishing? Basically, this is about sending an SMS. Let's say, for example, you would get messages from Airtel, or you might also get messages, let's say, from PhonePe or from Google Pay, or let's say, for example, ICICI or SBI, so on and so forth. So whenever SBI sends you a message, there is a format that they follow. When Airtel sends you a message, there is a format that they follow. Similarly, in such a format, you would get a message from one of these persons, and then you would think that it is from a legitimate source. They would have given you a link, and they would ask you to click on the link. You go on to click in this particular link. This will take you to one of the websites. You will assume that this is a legitimate website, and you give all your details. So Anubis happens to be one such malware. Similarly, there is another example called as roaming mantis. It is another prolific malware targeting mobile banking users. The group attacks Android devices and spreads the malicious code by hijacking domain name systems through smishing exploits we did just discuss. For iOS users, the landing page mimics Apple's official website, while Android devices download another malware. So if you have an iPhone and if you feel that you have high security, I'm sorry, this article says it is not. So this article clearly goes on to say that the hackers have also become more intelligent. They are even hacking iOS devices as well. So this myth that iOS devices, Apple phones that you all show off, will also get infected. So is iOS safe? So there is no notion that iOS is more secure operating system. Added to it, this article currently goes on to say that because of all these issues of malware, what we have is couple of concerns. What are these concerns? One, there is a shortage of technology, engineering, data and security experts needed by banks to realize their digital aspirations tends to hide a much wider problem. Banks appeal as first choice employers of all kinds of talent has faded. This basically means that whenever they're coming up with a application, this will require a lot of security. Shortage of technology is one aspect. They do not have enough expertise. This is another aspect, which is why their mobile application is susceptible to all these kinds of cyber attacks. The lack of adequate cyber security and dearth of talent in the banking could potentially lead to further rise in cyber attacks on user devices, says this article. Added to it, there are also associated issues as well. One is to do with data leakage. What is this data leakage? Let's say, for example, you as a person happen to download one of the application. This application will ask you for certain permissions. You do not read it, but instead you want to use this application on a faster basis. So you give access permission to every type of things that they ask you for. So at this particular moment is where these hackers would be able to steal the data. Had you not given the information, they would have not tracked you, but because you have given the information, they will look at your contacts, they look at your photos, so on and so forth. This is what is called as data leakage. So we also have to be careful, says this article. Then there is unsecured Wi-Fi. What is this unsecured Wi-Fi? Let's say we go to a coffee day, or let's say we go to a railway station. We do keep our Wi-Fi's on, and this particular point we also want to download because it is free. At this particular point, because it is free, you go on to download, but then there is a hacker sitting who is also able to access your data. So unsecured Wi-Fi could also be a problem as well. And finally, there is broken cryptography as well. What is this broken cryptography? Let's say, for example, there is one of the companies. This particular company wants to release one of its products very soon. So what does it do? It knows for a fact that there is a problem, a loophole in its software or a bug in its software, but because it wants to release on a faster basis, and it eventually realizes that after 6 months or 1 year we will release the patch. So during this 6 months, whenever they realize that there is a loophole but still want to release their product, That moment, if there is a hacker who happens to encounter this loophole, he goes about hacking this particular loophole and ultimately taking the information as well. So this is what is also called as broken cryptography. So these are the number of issues that have been existing when it comes to the cyber issues. In order to overcome, we have to be careful and extremely cautious as well. We need to make sure that there is digital hygiene as well. What is digital hygiene? In case there is any link which you're not sure of, please don't click on it. And whenever the operating system or an app comes up with an update, ensure that you also update your phone as well. And whenever there are these applications that are run, make sure that you download it from the official sources. It is this that we have to understand with respect to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article says Japan's continuing struggle with gender parity. Let us try and understand what is this article all about. This article says Japan might have been a developed country. Japan might have improvised on the technology as well. Japan might also have high income as well. All this is good, but when it comes to social norms, when it comes to cultural norms, and when it comes to gender norms, it is not doing good. And as a result, there is large scale gender inequality in Japan. So we have to draw lessons from Japan in the near future if India aspires to become a developed country, says this article. So what are the concerns when it comes to Japan? Let's look at the statistics. According to recent data, Japan recorded the lowest total births in 2021 at just 8,10,000. Japan also ranked lowest among the developed countries in the World Economic Forum's Global Gender Gap Index of 2022. Japan ranked abysmally low at 116 out of 146 countries in the Gender Gaps Index of 2022. This makes Japan the worst performer among the G7 group, where most of the countries rank between 10 and 27, barring Italy at 63. This is the negative side about its statistics, but there is a positive side as well. Japan has a perfect score on gender equality in educational attainment. In fact, 15-year-old Japanese girls and boys scored higher than the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. Average in scientific and mathematical literacy and reading performance, health and survival of women, including health life expectancy, also stands near a perfect score of 0.97. Despite all this, Japan is not able to improvise. That is because there are not many of the women who are in the leadership position, whether it is in the government or at the private. This article currently goes on to say Japan's overall low rank in the gender gap index stems from the low presence of women in the leadership roles and politics. It ranks below 130 when it comes to women in parliament and women as senior officials and managers. Women hold a mere 10% of Japan's parliamentary seat as of April 2022, as compared to about 30% or more in G7 countries, and Japan has not had a female head of the state in the past 50 years. This basically means there is something wrong in the society of Japan when it comes to accepting the gender parity. In 2021, the head of the Tokyo Olympics Committee, also a former prime minister, received global backlash and was forced to resign for his sexist remarks about why women should not participate in board meetings because they talk too much. Such is the vague statement, absurd statement, weird statement, and pathetic statements that have been given against women. And they say they should not be part of it because they speak too much. That is the kind of absurdity that has been prevailing in the political system of Japan. In political speeches, women have been referred to as birth giving machines. A few years ago, medical schools in Japan were reported to have rigged the entrance examination scores of female candidates, penalizing them for their gender to ensure that 70% enrolled were males. Why did they do so? That is because whenever women are employed, they will eventually get married, and when they get married, they go on to conceive. When they go on to conceive, they will have the children, and when they have the children, they will quit the job. So why train them so much is the myopic viewpoint that the people of Japan have. What is the inference we can draw? Japan has high per capita income. This does not mean that they have higher equality, is what is this article all about. Why is this continuing? That is because of the gender norms in Japan. When you consider Japan, Japan basically has gender norms where it has allocated roles to men as well as the women. When it comes to men, they should be working out, and when it comes to women, they should be at home taking care of children as well as the family. So these are the norms that have been attached to the gender. Added to it, whenever you speak about jobs, it is also said that men should go outside the house, they should be working for the family, and if it is women, they have to work within the family, take care of the children as well as the senior citizens. If it is men, they would be able to go out, they would be able to have interpersonal negotiations as well, which women cannot do. So is the gender norm that has been prevailing in Japan. As a result of such prevailing norms, many of the women do not get married because they will be pushed into this particular barrier where they would not be able to act independently. And here is where women want to stay independent, so they are not going through this door of marriage. Because they are not going through the doors of marriage, there is birth control that is happening. So low marriage rates have led to fall in the consumption and investment as singles consume less, and at the same time low birth rate implies a steady decline in the future workforce and a rising pension burden of aging population on the fiscal account. So because women are not getting married, this has two possible issues. One, the marriage rates are comparatively less, and when the marriage rates are comparatively less, you would not have the husband and the wife, you would not have the children as well. This ultimately means the consumption in the economy will reduce, and at the same time, if there are no children, it will only be the senior citizens. These are the aging population who have to be taken care of, and there is no demographic dividend in the country, says this article. So marriage rates in Japan have fallen by 50% since 1970, and fertility has fallen to 1.3 children per woman in the year 2021. So what is that India can do? So it is not just about educating the women, it is not just about high income, but it is also about bringing a change in the thought process in the society. You cannot have gender norms restricting women what to do, what not to do. If women is educated, she should be allowed to work. If she is not allowed to work, it ultimately leads to all these kinds of issues, and ultimately, and that country may be economically empowered, but it is socially and culturally backward, says this article. So India will have to draw lessons from it, and going forward, India may become economically developed, but it should also make sure that all these issues are taken into consideration and policy initiatives will have to be considered, says this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article says new state demand in Northeast sparks poll boycott threat. The Eastern Nagaland People's Organization has threatened to boycott the 2023 Assembly polls unless its demand for carving out a separate state from Nagaland is not fulfilled. So there is an organization by the name East Nagaland People's Organization. They say that in Nagaland there has to be another state that is carved out, that is the Eastern Nagaland, and ultimately this will be called as the Frontier Nagaland. If it is not carved out, they will not be participating in the democratic process, says this organization. The ENPO has been demanding the creation of Frontier Nagaland to be free from the decades of neglect. The six districts, that is Kifaya, Longlang, Mon, Naklok, Shamator and Tusong, have a total of 20 of the 60 assembly seats. So this that is just mentioned, Kifaya, Tusong, Langyong and Mon, these are some of the districts. These should be carved out and a separate state called as Frontier Nagaland should be created, says this Eastern Nagaland People's Organization. Why is that they are requesting for a separate state? That is because if you go and look into the history books, the entire region was once called as Tusong when it was part of the Northeast Frontier Agency. It was attached to the Naga Hills district in 1957, and when Nagaland attained statehood in 1963, it became a part of the state. So this particular part is not developed. On one side, it is facing developmental constraints, and on the other side, there are tribal issues as well. What is to do with the development? The region, that is the eastern part of Nagaland, is currently underdeveloped and backward. Eastern Nagas have been neglected by the successive governments. There is no proper all-weather road communication in many parts of the eastern Nagaland. There is no water supply in most parts of the eastern Naga areas. People are suffering from non-availability of drinking water. So they basically believe that development activities have not taken place where on the eastern side of Nagaland. Added to the developmental issues, the demand for a separate state is also a tribal one. There are about 16 tribes in Nagaland. Of these, there are four dominant tribes: Ao, which controls about 70% of the governmental job and service sector, and the wealthy Lotha, Sima, and Angami. But there are six tribes under the ENPO, which happens to be Konyok, Phom, Chang, Kemyong, Inchunga, Santyam, all socially and educationally backward. So there are many tribes of this eastern Nagaland. There are few tribes, they are not able to derive any of the benefits. So if a separate state is carved out, these tribals will also have economic advantages. So we have to create a new state is their proposal, which we have to wait and watch how the government responds to. Now let's look into the next article. This article says revisiting the S. Subramaniam Balaji versus Tamil Nadu judgment. This article here is speaking about the freebie culture. We have recorded a video recently in our explain session which has given you everything about the freebie culture. Kindly look into it. And all that this article says is that in Subramaniam Balaji versus Tamil Nadu, the Supreme Court of India clearly went on to say that in case there are political parties who have gone on to say that in their manifestos they would be providing so and so scheme and mechanism, that should not be considered as corrupt practice and should not be equated with bribe, and this ultimately means it is not an issue, said the Supreme Court of India in Subramaniam Balaji versus Tamil Nadu judgment. But now we have the Supreme Court of India which has said that they may have to reconsider this particular judgment, primarily because if political parties go on to spend extravagantly, in that case we may be using most of the money for unproductive works, and when we require to be spending for the productive work, they may not have the money or we may have to borrow from the market. This ultimately is a wastage of public exchequer. So the Supreme Court will reconsider this judgment is what is this article all about. But for the rest of it, what we have done is we have recorded a recent video about freebies. Kindly look into it. Now let's look into the mains practice questions. Any mandatory linking of Aadhaar to the voter ID is problematic. Do you agree? Justify. Explain with relevant examples the possible reasons for the rise of smartphone malware and discuss the mobile security solutions. So please do write all your answers on the comment section. Peer review, do give positive feedback to your friends' answers. In case you wish to upload an image, you can visit our website free IAS prep and then upload an image and also discuss with your fellow pals as well. This is it for today. Thank you for watching. All the best.